Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Christina Nosti, Events and Marketing Director at Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and tonight I'm thrilled to welcome you to our virtual evening with Dacher Keltner to discuss Awe, the new science of everyday wonder and how it can transform your life, published by our friends at Penguin Press. Dacher Keltner is a professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley, and the faculty director of UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. A renowned expert in the science of human emotion, Dr. Keltner studies compassion and awe, how we express emotion, and how emotions guide our moral identities and search for meaning. His research interests also span issues of power, status, inequality, and social class. He's the author of The Power Paradox and the best-selling book Born to Be Good, and the co-editor of The Compassionate Instinct. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Scott Rogers, a nationally recognized leader in the area of mindfulness and law. He is a member of the faculty of the University of Miami School of Law, where he founded and directs its mindfulness and law program, and he co-founded and co-directs the University of Miami's Mindfulness Research and Practice Initiative. Professor Rogers is the author of 6 books on mindfulness, including The Elements of Mindfulness and the recently released The Mindful Law Student. Throughout this broadcast, please remember to post your questions for the speakers using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And thank you for purchasing your copy of Awe from Books and Books and for supporting independent bookstores everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Welcome.
Hi, Christina.
Hello.
Thank you, Christina. All right, Dacher, what a wonderful and important book you've written. And it's also beautifully written. You offer us a bit of a tour of the science and the research that you've been doing with your colleagues for a good number of years now. You tell stories from people all across the world in relationship to awe and their experience of awe. And you also share with us, fascinating voices and insights from people like Charles Darwin and Edmund Burke and Rachel Carson and Jane Goodall. And so it's a real fun read. It's a nice journey. I found among the most poignant aspects of the book your discussion of your relationship with your brother Rolf that you wove throughout the book. He passed away several years ago. And it seems from the reading of the book, my reading of the book, that in many ways he was your guide in certain respects. He was younger. He was your younger brother, but in many ways he was your guide to awe in life. And then his passing, and it was among the more tearful aspects of the book, but tearful in, I think, the way that you wish for it to be, really inspiring. That in his passing, it seems that in some ways it may have deepened your relationship to awe personally. And that part of that is sort of expressed in this book. Could you say a little bit about why you wrote the book and what awe means to you?
Wow, what a terrific question, Scott. And it's so great to be in conversation with you. Yeah, I actually started writing this book in grief. And as you nicely discerned, at the loss of my brother. And he was, as I thought about his passing, a guide in my life to awe. He was younger than me, but he was full of courage and kindness and joy and spirit. And he got me to think about, serving other people and jumping off high rocks into rivers and going backpacking and challenging the status quo. And so he was this kind of a guide to awe. And when he passed, the night of his passing, we went up there as a family, and I was astonished at in watching him head into the afterlife or whatever it is, how awe-inspiring it was. Just his peaceful face, the space around him seemed to be kind of expanding in this interesting way, and it was filled with mystery for me, Scott. I'm not a religious person. at the time, and had no conception of what it meant. And after, in the state of grief, I, about 3 or 4 months into it, I was not sleeping, panicky, dreaming of him, hallucinating about him, really missing this guide to awe in my life. And like you said, I went in search of awe. And the big thing that I wrote the book, I interviewed tons of people, I went to awe spots, I went to places he and I hiked, I read a lot of sacred texts in my life. And the big thing I learned about awe is that, first of all, at its core, it helps us relate to the mysteries of life. That's, I, like a lot of people, love certainty, and suddenly here was my brother gone. I didn't know how to make sense of it. And awe really taught me, like, imagine new possibilities about how he could be part of your life. Imagine what it is to be alive. Think about, let awe guide you toward that. And it changed my understanding of awe profoundly, that experience.
Yeah, what's so touching about that is that you have been researching and talking about awe for many years.
Yeah.
So there is this expertise intellectually, and I'm sure intuitively, that you have always brought to it, and then something really opened up. And the book, do you think the book is different as a result of that? For those who read it?
Yeah, and it was a major editorial choice. Like, how much of my brother should I build into this book? There's stories of him and I, in the mountains and at clubs and in our childhood, and then him passing. And I ended up putting a lot of that story, in some sense, it's the most important story in the book, right? That illustrates what the science and these other narratives that I gathered. So it was fundamental to my writing of the book, is to figure out how my evolution of feeling awe and thinking about it, shaped by this grief, made contact with this science that I've been doing of awe for 15 years. And I have to tell you, Scott, one of the things that gave me such strength as we surveyed people from 26 countries about what gives them awe, right? And we find that it's moral beauty and music and collective movement and visual art and spirituality. And then we made this last finding as my brother was passing away, that life and death brings us awe. The birth of kids and children, and the passage of people, the passing of people. And that scientific finding gave me strength to do the personal work.
Well, I'm grateful, and that you chose to make that editorial decision, because it really brings to life, right, in the most poignant of ways, the science. And so you just were referring to some of the research. I know you did this really fascinating, I'm sure, complex study, where you did go out to across 26 countries, I think, and 20 different languages. And could you say a little bit about that research? And you just touched on maybe 5 or 6 of the 8 wonders of life.
Yeah.
Is that which are really sources of awe, right?
Yeah. Thank you. You can ask people how much awe they feel, give them a 10-point scale. I feel a 4 or 7. You can measure physiology like goosebumps. And I really felt that wasn't getting to the heart or essence of awe, that awe is about meaningful things in life. And I was concerned that, we make sure in this research to understand the meaning of awe, that we find people from radically different cultures. So we, in the spirit of William James, who gathered stories of religious experience, we figured out how to gather stories of awe from 26 countries that really vary profoundly in their religion and, economic indices and political structures and gender identities and so forth. And then we got all these stories, 2,600 of them. We had speakers of 20 languages, and these are translating stories from Mexico and Japan and India and Poland and Germany and Russia, US, Canada. And we translated them, and then we classified them, and we uncovered really the heart of the book scientifically, which is the 8 wonders that give us awe, which is the moral beauty of people, their kindness and courage all around us, collective movement like dance and being at a sporting event. I saw you do a little collective movement there. Nature, music, spirituality, visual design, paintings and architecture and the Art Deco buildings in Miami and so forth. And then, two that are a little bit more mysterious, but big ideas. Like, you teach mindfulness, and it's like, when you're in a deep state of mindfulness and you observe your mind, you're like, wow, the mind is incredible. Mindfulness is a big idea. And then this last category I referred to of life and death. And so those are kind of a roadmap for people, for the reader to just think about, what does awe mean to them? Where do they find it? Where can they cultivate it?
And so there's a variety of things that are really fascinating about that. One of them that you write about in the book, and I naturally reflected on it at the same time, was like, even what you have behind you is a bit of like a landscape of nature. And this idea that nature would be the place where people would say, this is it. And yet you found that across, I think this was part of the study, but again and again, moral beauty sort of popped up as number one. And could you say a little bit about that? Because that really, in some ways, makes it a very human, right? A very human, because nature was here long before us.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, I would say that was the most surprising finding in my 15 years of studying awe scientifically, which is in this survey, 26 countries, we classify it, we tally it up, 8 wonders. And like you, I had thought nature would be the most common source of awe. And then I thought, well, looking around the world, spiritual traditions, the great religious experiences of the Buddha and, the Bhagavad Gita and St. Paul on the road to Damascus, I thought spiritual experience would be common too. But by far our most common source of awe is the beauty, the moral beauty of other people. And people wrote about, just kindness that you see in the streets. Like, 6 days ago, or a couple of weeks ago, I saw a Berkeley student. I walked out of a drugstore and she just gave $35 to an unhoused guy. Just like, here you go, man. Pow, I teared up. So kindness, courage, when you speak truth to power or you face fear. So, this is striking. I do a lot of work in healthcare, and I ask medical doctors and physicians' assistants and nurses to tell stories of awe, and they talk about the courage of patients with serious diseases and how awe-inspiring it is to be around them. And then overcoming obstacles was the third kind of moral beauty, which is, a mom from Ireland, her daughter was born with club feet, and then 12 years later, she's in the audience watching her dance, and just tears are flowing out of her eyes. So, Scott, I mean, we think Instagram is reality. We think Facebook is reality. We think, violent video games is reality. It's not. Moral beauty is everywhere, ready to inspire us.
And as you're speaking, it brings to mind, it also may be what we need to sort of keep us going, right?
That literature, and it's always worth thinking, when people think about moral beauty and they think, oh, well, now I've got to go to India and hang around the Dalai Lama for 2 weeks. I can't do that, right? But actually, it was very often the moral beauty, just brief encounters. I was just on book tour in England, and in this audience, this guy said, I just was on the tube coming here, and I looked into another guy's eyes, and we made this kind of eye contact saying, we share humanity. And it just made him tear up. So moral beauty is easy to prioritize and find in our daily lives. Just a couple of minutes will really benefit you.
Yeah, good. In a little bit, we'll get to, because, I like how it can transform your life. So what's actionable in that set? And you talk about and we'll get to it, the awe walk, right?
Yeah.
Which to me is very much a mind, they and also when you said before about mindfulness and sort of like the mind, one of the things that you spoke to is how vast, the vastness and the mysteriousness of things, the vast. And so when you said that, I thought the mind, I never thought of it before. It's vast and it's mysterious.
I would think so.
Two things. One, I was taken how you spoke to how when you went to talk to, I think, San Quentin, and you were at a moment when you were about to talk with the people about awe, you wonder to yourself, wait a minute here, am I being presumptuous, right? I mean, am I being presumptuous? And then could you say a little bit about how that that flipped when you had the experience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to this day, you know, I think if awe is about vast mysteries and how we make sense of them, like somebody passing away or the kindness of a stranger, for all of us thinking about the meaning of this emotion, we often learn a lot about it in encounters with extraordinary people who just surprise us with insights. You know, probably you in the meditation world, you might encounter a meditation teacher and suddenly you get a deep insight into the nature of the mind and the contemplative mind. And for me, it was teaching in San Quentin prison. You know, I used to go regularly in there as part of restorative justice, which I'm sure you know a lot about. And they had me come in and give a talk. And I was there with 180 men in blue, prisoners. A lot of them had done really hard things, harmful things, you know, and it was this challenging moment for me because they wanted me to talk about compassion, gratitude, and awe. And often we think of awe as being this privileged emotion. It's not. It's very human and everyday, as we've been saying. And I was giving this talk and I was like, wow, the last thing these guys need is a Berkeley guy who's white and privileged and so forth to tell them about awe. So I was like, in the spirit of, well, women, I'm like, I'm going to ask these guys what they think about it, you know? So I said, all right, before I get into awe, I got to ask you, like, tell me a recent moment of awe. And then I was in a chapel, it was quiet. And then these hands shoot up and I still get goosebumps thinking about them, you know, the light, being able to learn how to read, touching my granddaughter's hand, talking to my cellie, my cellmate about music, reading the Quran, meditating, looking at the clouds and the fog on the San Francisco Bay. I literally was like, that got me to a central concept in the book of everyday awe, that if these guys in prison eating the crappy food that they get with the bad healthcare, and they're trying to make it, they can find awe. It's all around us.
Yeah, and I like you talk about everyday awe and wild awe, and so maybe we'll dip into that territory. Along the way, you know, music I think was number 3.
Yeah.
And you tell the story of Darwin.
Yeah.
I think while he's walking through the college, the campus, hearing the bells, and you said something like musical shivers.
Yeah.
And then you talk about Miles Davis, right? So we got Davis and Darwin sort of juxtaposed.
Thank you.
One of the great the music geniuses of all time, and Darwin, who claims to have had no aptitude for music.
He was terrible.
And yet both found in experiencing music awe. Could you speak a little bit about why you brought those into the book? I think but also what that says to you.
Yeah, you know, I brought Darwin and Miles Davis into the story because of the bodily response of awe to music. And it's really striking, of those 8 wonders, and I think our audience would probably agree, like, and I'll ask you, Scott, like, man, some pieces of music can give you goosebumps, you start crying, and it is a mystery why, to me, sound waves coming through your eardrums, Charles Darwin's eardrums and Miles Davis's eardrums. Miles Davis was hearing I think it was John Coltrane, or I can't remember, one of the great jazz greats of his youth, starts producing a neurochemical signal, and suddenly you're crying and getting goosebumps and hugging people and feeling profound meaning. So that I brought them in to say, this is deeply universal, this visceral reaction to music, an awe reaction in the body. And what do you have an experience like that comes to mind of sort of tearing up at music?
Oh, without question. Whether it's songs from periods in my life where when I hear them, they take me back. So that's interesting. But it has the visceral, tender, usually very tender, poignant emotions that are pleasant, right? It's pleasant. Yeah. And certainly Elgar cello concertos. And I mean, there can be things that by surprise hit you, and
Yeah.
or you just love to listen to because it just continues to. And certainly, there's so many in my midst
Yeah.
who, music where that what's it called? What do you call it? The
Collective
collective
effervescence.
effervescence, right?
Yeah.
There's just something about being in community and
Yeah.
fish and all these different. So yes, it's a
Yeah.
big yes. And music is wonderful because there's so many forms, and it reaches us and has been around for so very long.
Exactly. And it's one of the mysteries. And I had to talk to musicians to really get a handle on why do these sound waves produce awe and tears in the sense. And one of the interesting answers is really why I introduced Miles Davis's quote in Charles Darwin, which is our bodies get these chills. A lot of people listening to us have probably had chills in awe a lot. And that chills response, studies are suggesting, is really a very ancient mammalian response when social mammals really merge with each other to understand things, to face things together. And that tells us that one of the primary purposes of music is to stir awe that really allows us to form community. And that's a central hypothesis now about the evolution of music is that it through rhythm and collective movement and the goosebumps and the sense of merging, we become one, right? We get out of the self and into more of a collective view of the world.
And along with the goosebumps, there's tears. Could you say a little bit about tears and awe?
Yeah, the neurophysiology of awe, the goosebumps and the tears, the default mode network, the vagus nerve, the inflammation response, tell us such deep things. And this is why we do neuroscience, as you know. Tears are actually produced through the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, which is about opening to the world, not being fearful and threat-based, but opening, trusting, and engaging. And that's at the core of awe. And then really nice work by Alan Fisk has shown we tear up when we see people forming community, right? Two athletes from opposing teams hugging each other, you tear up. Two strangers hugging, you tear up. And those are signs of the awe of people forming community, moving from separate individuals to shared identities. And what a powerful bodily reminder of the evidence of community around us that the tears point to.
Yeah, and you distinguish, I think importantly, fear.
Yeah.
Which there's interesting. It seems the boundaries at times can seem a little fuzzy, and yet they're very different.
Really important. And it took us, one of the things, that when you start to study an emotion like awe, sort of this moral sentiment, if you will, is you try to approach it linguistically. And what does this emotion mean, right? What is it really about? And the etymology of awe, it's the origin of the words, go back to 8th and 9th century Norse and Old English, where it really is about fear and dread and terror, right? And so we were wondering, and some people have made the case, maybe awe is just a variant of fear, right? It's just part of this threat-based emotional response to the world. So we did a lot of different research, from physiology to brain science to subjective feelings to expression. And it really suggests that awe is really quite far away from fear and terror and horror, and really closer to emotions like beauty and interest and absorption with the world. One of my favorite demonstrations of this is, and I'm going to test you, Scott. Okay, I'm going to count to 3, and I want you to give me your best sound of awe. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, exactly. Whoa. All right, now I'm going to count to 3. Give me your best fear sound, just low version. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, totally different sounds, right? Oh, so you can do that kind of research, and it tells us there's a really important lesson here, which is that the essence of awe, even though sometimes it's about watching somebody pass away, or a veteran I interviewed, just the horrors of combat that he had been through, the prisoners I interviewed, lots of horror there. But awe gets us to open our minds and to wonder and to find new kinds of meaning.
So with regard, you said, awe to wonder, and
Yeah.
I've heard you share that awe opens up wonder, which gets us thinking, right? So it goes from this very experiential thing that has this vastness and this mystery and this a lot of unknown, to wondering about it, to being creative, and then perhaps out of that, the art and the music and
Yeah.
the storytelling and the literature. And in some ways, do you think that when one experiences awe, it sort of gets the nervous system moving in these very compelling ways, and then as it begins to be reflected upon and sort of more top-down orientation to it,
Yeah.
it then creates the creative expression that
Yeah.
allows many people to experience the awe from
Yeah.
which it came, but that the person who first experienced it loses some of it in that process for this greater good? Or does it stay? Because I'm interested in your thoughts on that, because can we handle awe all the time, or is it too much, or is that the real possibility that our lives offer us if we
Yeah.
can be open to it?
What a terrific, man. That's a deep question, right? So, or a set of observations. The first being, and I agree with you that, and there's beginning new empirical science, and I bet a lot of our audience would find this intuitive, that it's these moments of awe, right, and wonder that spur creativity, that spurred Vincent van Gogh when he thought about his mental health condition and his life to paint as he did, or that led Beethoven to certain kinds of music that were really grounded in awe. And a lot of science. I review a lot of the science that their creative work. One of my favorites being Newton and Descartes were awestruck by rainbows. They're just like, how in the world do you see rainbows? They're mind-blowing. And they figured out the physics and color theory to make the case for why. So awe does lead us to creativity in the arts and sciences. And I think it's a really interesting question you raise. And clearly that benefits culture. Awe is an engine of cultural evolution and advance. But you raise an intriguing question, which is, does it take the awe away from the creator? And I don't think we know. Can we have too much awe? Definitely. We've done research, and there are people who don't feel any awe at all. And
Really?
and I think that's a sad condition. Einstein really felt this emotion was kind of the soul of humanity, and so we miss if we don't feel awe. And we had people feeling awe 15 times a day. And that's good for a 4-year-old, but if you have to get to work and get your job done. I think moderation to a good deal is a good place to be with awe.
Okay, so so you offer the awe walk, right?
Yeah.
Which seems very doable. We know getting out in nature or wherever it is that we're walking can be helpful. Could you share with us what that awe walk instruction practice is?
Yeah, this is so. This was really a great experience for me, which is I work with mindful.org, and they were like, hey, there's Berkeley guys studying awe, and they called me up and they're like, let's do something to get people into a mindful state of awe, right? What should we do? And I was like, God, that's an interesting question. So we ended up landing on, given the great walking traditions, like you said, the walking meditations, pilgrimages, backpacking, the walking traditions of Europe, let's see if we could create an awe walk. And so the instructions are really simple. You go on your regular walk, but instead of, looking at your Fitbit, counting your steps and whatever, you seek awe. So you pause, you sync up your breath, you deepen your breathing, you attend to your feet and sort of get into a good rhythm of walking. And then we have the awe mindset instructions, which are, go places that are mysterious for you and a little surprising, that are not part of your ordinary walk. And then I like this one, and it really comes from the cognitive science of awe, which is now really shift your attention from really small things like the patterns of growth on an acorn and then pan out and look at vast things, like look at the light across all the trees you see, or look at If you're in Miami, look at a wave, get small, look at its pattern, and then look at the patterns of waves in the ocean. And what we found is that those simple instructions in our study, the participants were 75 years old, and they fared better after doing this awe walk for 8 weeks. So it's very simple and powerful.
So was the awe walk? I didn't know the connection to mindful.
Yeah.
In terms of its origins, but but the instruction that you just spoke to about looking at the micro and then expanding out and making that deliberate shift, did that precede the walk, and you have incorporated into it so that we can do that anywhere, anytime? Even if we're sitting at our desk right now, I can look at this cup and I can also look at something here and begin to pay attention to it. That's the the mindfulness piece really sort of falling into it. And then shift and broaden the perspective. That seems there's something very compelling about that.
Yeah, it is. And I like, as you know, Scott, like basic forms of attention, William James, attention is the identity. It's our identity. It's consciousness. So what are the ways we can attend to the world? And that small to vast came out of, in part, Edmund Burke, who's this great philosopher. And, when you read him writing about how you find the sublime, it was like getting small and getting vast. And then also, just in talking about awe, people would talk about, I just say like, hey, when have you last felt awe? Tell me about it. And in my teachings, people would talk about the vastness a lot, like night sky, big trees, the light on the sea. But very often they talked about small things, really getting into the microscopic observation of an insect or under a cell under a microscope. Or I profile one of my favorite small awe experts, Rosalind Fisher, in the book, who's an artist who takes incredible photographs with a microscope of her tears, right? And her cells. And you look at the photos, you're like, wow, life is amazing if there's such organic structures in my tears.
So in many ways, and I'm thinking, like, in a moment we'll go to questions.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, people who are, it's 7 o'clock, it's now 7:30. People are going to be like, it's the night's coming down. There's the night sky. There's, whoever's at home sleeping or getting ready for bed. In some ways we can take things for granted. Maybe in a moment, and a suggestion for those of us here, me included, when I drive home, how can I not just have it be another routine walking in the front door and that's fine, but it seems like there's more right there, and it comes from this question, which is, in many ways you're speaking to the things around us, people and things around us that can inspire awe. Do you think that awe comes from connecting more fully to what's around us, or is it something within us that's awakened? And that awakening is facilitated by what's around us.
Yeah, we could write a book on that, Scott. That's a terrific question, right? So part of it, I do believe, is orienting the mind in a certain way, of pausing, giving yourself a little time, even if it's just 30 seconds. One of our practices is to look up at the sky for a minute. It's all you do. And people are like, whoa, look at the patterns of clouds, and most people don't do that very often. So pause, deepen your breathing. And then, I do believe this small to vast is a good tool that applies across the realms we find awe, the 8 wonders. Think about a point in a painting. Think about individual notes in a piece of music. Think about one wave in an ocean. Think about one cloud in a storm, and then pan out and get the vastness. That gets us there. And then I think that, our audience getting home at 7, wanting to find some awe, should really turn to those 8 wonders and tell stories of moral beauty. Get to the dinner table, like, what was an act of kindness you saw, or courage recently? Do a little collective movement with some music. Get a little moment of nature. It's come up so often in conversations, and you brought it up yourself, like, don't just flip on music thoughtlessly. Like, listen to music that means something to you, almost spiritually, right? Like, this is what I care about. So there's a lot of easy stuff to do to find awe when you get home at 7 p.m.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for the
very
question.
much. We could talk. I could talk with you and learn from you for a very long time. I'm very grateful, as I know many of us listening to you are grateful for this time
Thank
and
you.
for this really this gift of a book.
Mm.
Christina, I don't see the chat. I know that right around now you wanted us to
It's
entertain.
you look below where it says ask a question, but there aren't any questions yet. So I think we need to remind everyone watching now is a good time to post questions.
Okay, now is the time to post questions. I have a lot of questions, so I can certainly ask a couple more questions. And also, I think, Dacher, what would you? I mean, you've been very responsive to the things that I've posed some of my own questions and some of the things that I think are useful to share with others about the book. Anything that you would like about the book to share, or things that are related to the book that you find to be alive in you as you read the book that you wrote and have been thinking about for 15 years?
Well, I think, and I actually have a question for you that I bet would be of interest to our audience. I think the other, big point of the book, alongside moral beauty being the awe-inspiring qualities of other people and the practicing of awe, is everyday awe. That, you referred to this, that awe makes us aware of the wonders around us. And we found that empirically that, in different parts of the world, people feel awe 2 to 3 times a week, without prompting, without thinking about it, just in their daily lives. And that tells us that this isn't a rare emotion. This isn't an emotion for the privileged or vacations. This is just part of our minds, right? To go find it through like the instructions of the awe walk. So that was really a lot. That changed my orientation to awe personally. Like, wow, if I can just look for it in the streets or at a sunset or reading a little, it's there for us to enjoy. I guess my question for you is to think about how awe fits into the mindfulness world. And, I know you're starting to think about that. And what do you see are some of the opportunities? And please, audience members, tell us your stories of awe and send us questions.
Yeah. To me, they fundamentally fold in together. Mindfulness, being not mindfulness practices, they can be helpful pointers. Even the awe walk is a mindfulness practice, of course. In fact, you created it deliberately for Mindful Magazine. This being mindfully aware is noticing without the judgmental mind, or with less of it, noticing without the distractedness. It's a more clarified, seeing clearly what's there.
Right.
And there's so much there
Yeah.
that if we see it unencumbered by our preconceptions and our thoughts and our thinking we know it and not really seeing it for what it is, then it just seems that it all carry. And maybe we want a low grade awe, right? We don't want that to your point. But to go through life and to always be a little teary in the sense of the gratitude of the beauty of it all, the awe of it all, strikes me as we grow and mature and connect with each other more, and things fall away and happens more and more naturally and readily.
Yeah. There's this one. I was in some conversation recently, and the person I was with told this great story of Thich Nhat Hanh, kind of thinking about awe. And he said, God, sometimes I drink a glass of water and I hold the glass up and start marveling at water and what it does to the marvels of my nervous system and where water comes from. And 20 minutes later, he hasn't had the drink yet. So it's a lesson into how much awe there is and how to find its right proportion.
Could you say a little bit about some of the research where you have people experience something and then their relationship to the world, the way you measure it very cleverly, seems to change?
Yeah, that's why I use the word transformative or transform your life. This science, when you really just put it together, is astonishing. And these are studies where, you just experience awe for a couple of minutes, right? You think about an experience of awe from your childhood and write about it. Or you think about something awe-inspiring that happened to you last week. Or you imagine a really awe-inspiring place in nature that you love going to. Or you are shown a video of somebody who's morally beautiful, right? One being a young child who forgave this truck driver who had crashed his car into this young child's parents' car and caused a bunch of damage to the child, and he forgave him. So a couple of minutes of awe, and what you find is those 2 minutes of awe transform your sense of self. You are no longer so self-critical. They transform your sense of community. You feel like you have a stronger community. You're not lonely. They transform your reasoning, where you are more creative, as you said, and less polarizing in your view. And they transform your body. They activate the vagus nerve, quiet inflammation. So, Scott, like when I looked at that, I was like, wow, coming out of the pandemic with all the suffering people are enduring, like a couple of minutes of awe is a pretty good choice for benefiting mind and body.
And when you've manipulated in the lab what people are looking at, like at Yosemite, or maybe at the top of that nice structure you have right around the corner from you at Berkeley, and then people drew themselves. It was fascinating. Could you say just a little bit about, because that seems how their place in the world.
This was inspired by something that you see in a lot of awe writings, is that people are convinced that the ego dissolves, right? So in spiritual writings, there's a lot of references to like, I am nothing, I am, I'm dissolving, I'm turning into, the divine. In nature writings, Ralph Waldo Emerson, he's out on the Boston Commons on a cold day, and he says, standing here on the bare ground, my head uplifted in an infinite space, in this blithe air, all mean egotism vanishes. And I think a lot of people have that sense that with awe, my sense of self really transforms. It gets small. And so, one of our favorite demonstrations, we stopped visitors at Yosemite from 42 countries. And they, right when they're first looking at the valley, and it's like, wow. And we said, here's a piece of paper, draw what you see and put yourself in it, right? And so they draw, and then the self is tiny compared to, and the other kinds of conditions, like at Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. In our awe walk study, we had people take pictures of themselves with each walk. And in the awe walk condition, the self gets smaller and starts to drift off to the side of the photo. So it's really interesting that what awe does is it liberates us from the self and allows us to feel connected to more of the world.
Here's a question. Earlier you commented on with Rolf, your brother, and that you weren't religious, and you sort of phrased it in a way that suggests that's an evolving for you.
Yeah.
Speak a little bit to that.
Thank you, and what a great listener and great question. Yeah, and you asked this earlier, Scott. There are life events that transform your understanding of the world, and grief is right at the top of the list. And I was not a religious person, was not raised in any tradition. And I, through the process of grief, had a lot of stunning, like really striking, what you might call supernatural experiences, which a lot of people do. I thought I saw my brother a couple of times after he had passed. I felt his hand. He had very big hands. I felt his hand on my back twice. And I'm talking about where I paused. I'm like, oh, I feel the hand. And I really felt it there. I heard his voice in the wind all the time. I saw his face, his eyes in the redwood trees on the Berkeley campus. I was just like, he was everywhere. And on one of the last periods of writing, I went to a retreat in India, and it was a meditation retreat. And the last day we were meditating, and it was this very spiritual moment, if you will. And I truly felt him in the sky saying, it's okay. And, you know, to the listener's question and to your question, I can't explain those events, you know, and it opened my mind to what lies beyond psychology and evolution in the brain. And like, there are things that are mysterious that are worth exploring.
Well, yes, indeed. We have a question from Susan that I'll pose, and then maybe we can close. You've been very generous with your time, and I know you've been traveling all over the world and just traveled earlier today. I will say that in the book, I think at some point you describe a headband or which struck me as the kind that Bjorn Borg wore. I don't know if it was, but it was and I have one of those from way back. And so I want to share with you, when I wear it now, I will be thinking of you, and I will be thinking of Rolf. And there will be something I know that I will, even as I'm saying it, that I will
thank you
deepen because of that. So thank you for that. Susan says, saw a total eclipse a few years ago, not in a crowd, knew exactly what was going to happen and when. But in that moment, when the sky went dark and the corona appeared, there was that stunning reaction, calling out, shivering. All around in the rural place I could hear but not see other people shouting. It seemed like a primal thing, like there was a human genetic code for that kind of shared super awe. What do you think?
Yeah, you know, I have a whole chapter on collective effervescence, you know, and we've done research on the responses to eclipses. So Susan's right on. And it is this, you know, it's almost a form of celebration of awe, right? Which is, Emil Durkheim wrote about collective effervescence in terms of you start moving together, vocalizing together, very often dance and music and so forth, sporting events. And then you fix your attention on a shared object of attention that feels deeply awe-inspiring. The eclipse, a great musician's a singing performance, you know, a dancer, somebody doing spiritual activities or rituals. And it does have this, and I like the phrase collective effervescence. It's like everybody's joyful. They can be vocalizing, getting goosebumps, shouting in the eclipse example. And what a great experience to seek out, right? To find the awe in the collective as well. So important.
That's beautiful. And so, yeah, go ahead, Christina. Thank you.
I just want to share, like, honestly, I've been working at Books and Books for so many years, and, you know, I go to so many events, but I never cease to feel like that certain awe when I'm in a packed room and there are, you know, there's someone speaking and I watch the faces and just the reactions. And one of the most exciting things is like when there are young people who have never entered into a bookstore, have never seen an author event, how they react. So there is something to the whole like community aspect.
Get back together. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I just want to thank you both. This has been a wonderful conversation. It's been just delightful listening to this. What will you work on next, Dacher? Are you like on a different connected or?
Well, you know, one of the things I'm really interested in is moral beauty, and Scott zeroed in on that. What a surprise that what is the kind of the most universal source of awe is the goodness of others, their kindness and courage. And so I like the fact that the concept of moral beauty, that there's some sort of aesthetic quality to people's kindness, that it stirs the imagination to how we can be better. So that's what I'll be turning to next.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
And you regularly, is the Greater Good Science Center, the podcast that you do, is that a regular? Say a little bit about that, because that way people can just pick up with this later today or tomorrow.
We have a Science of Happiness podcast that a couple 100,000 people listen to, and we have awe shows on it, and many other things. So thanks for mentioning that.
Thanks for doing it.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone watching. Don't forget, you can purchase your copy of Awe at Books and Books. You can do it here online. You can come into any of our stores, and we have it there too. And we're just so grateful for you watching, being part of our community. Thank you. And have a wonderful evening. May there be lots of awe in your life.
Okay.
Mm.